Awesome to welcome University of Nebraska head coach Fred Hoiberg to the podcast. Hoiberg brings a distinguished resume to Nebraska that includes 4 years as an NBA front office executive, 4 years as an NBA head coach, and 5 years at Iowa State, where he orchestrated the biggest tournament in Big 12 history in 2011 and 2012 and guided the school to 4 straight NCAA tournament appearances. Of course, Hoiberg also played in the NBA, and we're going to dive into that and so much more on this podcast. Coach Hoiberg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. How you doing?
I'm awesome. Exciting to talk to you for sure. And Coach, I had a chance to watch you run a practice with Chicago Bulls during training camp. And I imagine a lot of people that haven't seen both maybe are curious, what are some of the main differences between an NCAA training camp and an NBA training camp?
I think the biggest thing, Chris, is the amount of time that you have. That's a big difference in college. We get so much time with the kids now, really going all the way back to June. That's when we started with our first summer session, was on June 8th. And you get 4 hours a week with them in the gym. They get 4 hours in the weight room. You get a couple days between sessions, and then you go right into summer session 2, which is basically the entire month of July. We mix in recruiting at that time and give our guys a couple weeks before they come back for the fall semester. And we really get right back to work again with 4 hours in the off season. Heading into the official date this year, which was September 27th, if I'm not mistaken. So just the amount of time, you've got a lot of your philosophies in already in college. When you head into normal practice, back in the old days when I played, you basically played pickup in the off season. And then once October 15th hit, that was the official start date of practice. And there was such an excitement in the air for that. And now you have so much time going into it. Really been practicing for a couple months already before the official start date. So we've got a lot of our concepts in, just as far as our absolutes, what we're looking to do offensively, defensively. In an NBA training camp, you got about a week to get everything in. You do have a little time. Most players come back after Labor Day, and you'll get an hour with them in the mornings. Leading into training camp, which generally starts right about the beginning of October. But then you've got much more conceptual ideas that you put in the NBA, where in college you have, like I said, so much more time to get your system in. As far as what you're doing, as far as drills and that type of thing, that's a lot of similarities. You have, I think it's 5 days now of two-a-days. Back playing for Larry Brown when I was with the Pacers, you had about 28 days of two-a-days. But, the Player Association got involved and they've really minimized those two-a-days and the amount of contact that you can have in a certain day. But, I think that's the biggest difference, Chris. You just have so much more time to get everything in the college game.
I mean, there's two factors, obviously, COVID and coaching during the pandemic, and then coming back from the NBA to college. So I'm curious if your philosophy has changed a little bit in terms of the efficiencies and really valuing what's important more than maybe in the past because of, those two experiences.
You know what? I really did change my philosophy. We got hit with COVID probably as hard as anybody in the nation last year. We had 10 of our guys all in a rotation, 4 of our coaches that came down with the virus. And they basically shut us down for 21 days where we couldn't even come in the gym. They were just trying to stop the spread, which is the right thing to do. With so many unknowns with the coronavirus. And, we came back, I think we had 5 days to prepare ourselves to play 14 days and 29 days, which is, basically an NBA type schedule. In fact, I think we saw only 5 teams in the world had more games in that amount of time than we did. And we came back with deconditioned bodies after the shutdown and really started playing really good basketball at the end of last season. Which is really kind of a mental type approach to our practices. When you have 1 day in between games, you can only put so much in, and you obviously have to have legs, try to be as fresh as possible heading into that grueling schedule. So I have changed the way that I look at things leading into games. We aren't going as long this year in our practices. We're still going very intense. And I think part of that, Chris, one of the reasons, if we go an hour in 20 minutes or an hour and a half, generally those guys are coming back for a second skill session, or they're coming back for individual film work. So you get the guys in, and those are very important when you're trying to build relationships, which is so critical when you're putting a team together, trying to build a trust level with your players. To have those individual sessions are very important. So I've changed my approach. Instead of going 2 or 2.5 hours, we've really shortened things up. And, obviously having fresh legs is as important as anything once you start competition.
That's fascinating to hear some of the changes that you and others have gone through because of these experiences. And going back to kind of, talking about your college experience now of installing things, what are some of the first things that you install when it comes to offense, knowing that you have this amount of time to now periodize and work with?
Well, a lot of the things we worked on, especially going back to that first summer session, were fundamentals and, pivoting, jump stopping, passing, all the different angles that we will have within the framework of our offense and our system. So really those first couple of weeks, it was really all about skill work, getting a point guard with a big, throwing the pocket, throwing the lob. Once you go like position with the point guard in a wing, work on the shake pass out of the corner, work on coming to a jump stop when playing in a crowd. Just all those things to hopefully take care of the basketball better than we did a year ago. And we didn't have an off season last year. None of us did because of COVID. And, then you get in, really was more NBA like last year when you had a short amount of time to get everything in. So early on, really for us, it was about the basics and the fundamentals. As far as once we start implementing the system, we always start out with pace. And we've always been one of the top pace teams going back to my days at Iowa State. And that's the number one thing that we work on. We've had, I think, top 5 in the Power 5 is in pace in my first 2 years here at Nebraska. We really wanted to implement a system that we felt could be successful over the long run. We feel really good about our roster this year as far as hopefully taking advantage. I think 82% of our shots were in the restricted area and from the 3-point line last year. The 2 areas you want to manufacture your shots and have your shot profile with the 2 most efficient shots on the floor. And we feel we're better equipped to take advantage of those situations when they present themselves. As far as implementing it, we're always looking at early spacing in the possession. If we can come down, have great spacing, draw 2 to the ball, if you keep that spacing, you're going to be able to hopefully get a high quality shot if you make the simple play. So, for us early, it's getting the ball up with pace. I remember Kevin McHale, who I played for and who I worked with, playing in those old Celtics teams. He always talked about, playing fast. You can't just say you're going to play fast. You have to work on playing fast. You can't just roll the ball out there and say we're going to shoot it in the first 10 seconds. It takes a lot of work to make sure you get the spacing right. If you attack a certain seam and a gap where the spacing, where the guys need to be, where they need to go in case you do run into help defense. So early possession, early offense is really what we work on for probably about a month. And once we get that right, then we start adding to our system more of our set type actions.
Great insights into how you do and what you do. And you said pace, and this is a curious question, is mainly, why does pace matter? Because we hear this buzzword a lot, as you said already, and you guys actually reflect it. But why is it so important to play with pace?
Well, for us, we play in a conference that's as good defensively as any in the country. And if we can get the ball down the floor quickly and strike before the defense gets set, that's what we're always looking to do early in the possession. If they are set, obviously we have our flow package. Our offense is a read and react system. It's very much an NBA style offense with the spread 5-out system that we run. And that goes all the way back to when we had a guy, Royce White, at Iowa State, who was a freight train coming down the floor. We led the nation in threes that year by spacing the floor out and giving the ball to Royce and letting him go to work. So, we've been running that 5-out system, really going all the way back to my second year at Iowa State, when the transfers that we had that really turned around our program became eligible just based on the skill set of our players. We were traditional that first year with a very good point guard, Deontay Garrett, who played a couple of years in the NBA. But then we really started with the 5-out spread, and we pretty much stuck with it, whether it was Iowa State, Chicago, or certainly now here at Nebraska, where we've added to that. But that's what NBA basketball is right now. It's a 5-out spread, read and react, in playing off it. And again, that's when the world of analytics that we live in, that's what creates those rim attempts and open 3-point shots.
Are you a proud coach now, seeing the spread of 5-out everywhere? Because you were definitely one of the early adopters, especially in the college game.
Yeah, we were. And again, that was just based on, I remember sitting down, Bobby Lutz, who was coming off a very successful 10-year run at University of Charlotte. He and I sat down and really talked about how we could take advantage of a frontline player in Royce White because of his unique skill set. A lot of people, just because of size, you're going to put a guy like that on the block. And, we just felt he was so unique. His best quality was as a passer. And then with Chris Babb and Tyrus McGee and Chris Allen and Scott Christopherson, we had great shooting around them. And then we went to George Niang, who came in after Royce, and we stayed with that, the hybrid type player. Royce always called himself, I'm an H. He called himself an H, which stood for hybrid. And, I think our job as coaches is you have to figure out the skill set of your team and then try to put them in a position where they can be successful. And in that second year with Royce, we spread it out and then we stuck with it. And what it does, Chris, it takes the big away from the basket. That's what creates all those driving lanes. I believe that year, Kansas gave up 40 points in the paint. People think it's just a 3-point shooting offense. And all 3 of those games were against us because we had Jeff Withey, who was the number 1 shot blocker in the country. We were able to stretch him out and take him away from the rim. And that's what creates rim attempts where that defense collapses. And that's what creates those kick out, hopefully open threes if you keep your spacing.
I think one of the other early things you adopted in the college game was flattening out to the corners as well. This modern spacing, which is obviously a big part of the 5-out. Curious then, because I think a lot of college coaches, high school coaches ask this question. What are some of the things that you have to modify for the college spacing to be able to make the 5-out work even better?
Yeah, it's, we still try to keep the pro spacing concepts. If we come into a drag screen, for example, so missed shots, we're going to flow into a drag, a step up, or a double drag. Not going to look over our shoulder and see what I'm calling. We have our flow package based on a miss, and that's getting the floor flattened out and coming down with an early ball screen. So we really want to keep that opposite wing. We have what we call a no-fly zone on our floor. So we really want to stay outside of that on the weak side to try to create that spacing. And again, with analytics, you're trying to eliminate those 3-point attempts. So naturally, if you're outside, that no-fly zone, and we incorporate the 4-point line, which a lot of the NBA Spurs, San Antonio Spurs concept. And if we stay outside that, hopefully that will, keep the defense closer to eliminate those threes. And again, that's what's going to create driving lanes. And once you get into that paint, you should have a lot of options.
Another high school specific question is, what do you do with non-shooters? Obviously, you're trying to recruit 5 shooters, but you've had situations where you have these non-shooters. So how are you adapting your system for them?
Yeah, we'll play those guys. We'll play them in the dunker spot a lot, even if they're a guard. It's a good position to be in where it could create. We had a kid, Dustin Hogue, at Iowa State, who was an unbelievable player. Just great size, 6'6". Just did everything for us. He came in with a reputation of not being able to shoot. I think he took 1 3 in his 2 years at Indian Hills Junior College. So what we did with Dustin is we would play him down in the dunker spot area to create some short pick and roll type situations, and then put him in a really good spot to offensive rebound where he was an absolute animal on the glass. So, it was, something that we, we'll do with non-shooters. We'll use them as screeners, flaring the shrink if a team's in a pack type defense, try to slip them out and get them rim opportunities. We'll post our wings if we have an advantage, a mismatch situation. So, those are certain things that you can do, but I think that dunker spot, doesn't matter what position you are. We put point guards in that position too. When we run an action to get a live pick and roll for our wing, put them down in those areas and keep their spacing, heels on the baseline, and that can create some good opportunity at the rim.
Yeah, great insight there, and understanding. You kind of mentioned you're not a systems guy, and we get the idea here that you like to run this flow game. Obviously, you like to have your players understand the concepts, and you run actions based on the strength of your personnel. I'm imagining another part of this, and I want you to discuss, is this idea of also hunting potential mismatches and attacking them, which is also a part of this philosophy.
Yeah, and NBA, you see this a lot more, Chris. You see a lot of small on small ball screens to try to get the matchup that you want, and then you get your switch attack offense, and you go from there and try to attack. Hopefully the mismatch that you create with the small, which most teams are switching now, and we will incorporate some of that just to hopefully get the matchup that we want on the floor, and then as you attack the switch. May not be for you, but if you can shrink the floor and create an open three, that's obviously a very good option. So, those are things that we will do to try to create a mismatch. we've got two things that we will do against the switch. Try to get a high-low opportunity if they front a big, if a guard, if you can create that, or we will retreat. If you switch a center off onto our point guard, we'll retreat it and get a full head of steam and go into attack mode. Again, to try to get into the paint, create a good, high quality, high percentage shot.
Yeah, that boomerang type action. And I don't know, is that what you called it in the NBA, or was it called something else?
Yeah, I mean, we just called it retreat or reload. So if we retreat it, we'll keep it, and then we'll just go ahead of steam, or you can retreat, hit, and then boomerang it back or reload it. So those that's what we call it. And then, we actually had the third R. We had retreat, reload, and then rescreen. So if you get a 4-man to switch, then you could do a 5-on-4 ball screen and see how they, guard an action that they're not used to guarding.
Oh, very cool. And then that boomerang and that retreat and reload type of situation, what are your teaching points for the guard or the player with the mismatch? Do you want them running into the pass? That's traditionally what we see.
On the boomerang, absolutely. Yeah. You want to go and, we call it the go and catch. You're going into your move before you catch it, and, really try to get a good downhill attack going into that move.
And that's also basically the stampede action, which has become popular as well, as you want a player to be able to 4-point line space, pass to attack an early helper, and you want them running into that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, again, on the shake pass, if you can create a tag on the single side and you're already going into your move, you see, I think Dallas was the best in the league at that. In fact, they had a couple actions that they would run for the shake into the go and catch, which would generally create a rim attempt.
Yeah, it's great to get some of these insights into some of these actions that we see all the time. And I'm curious, where do you get a lot of your actions? Do they come from the NBA, other college teams overseas? Where are you getting some of it? Because I think everyone's in agreement. You run great stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it comes from Mike Budenholzer. I think he really kind of revamped the game and went from more of a 4-out. He would still run his swing type action, but he did it early in Atlanta with a post, generally with Al Horford in there or Millsap. And, he really kind of morphed into the 5-out offense that you see now, the spread, and he runs a lot of great actions out of it. So that's one team that we study every year is Milwaukee. I think Kenny Atkinson, when he was running the 5-out stuff in Brooklyn, ran great stuff for Joe Harris and those guys. And obviously had the forceful rim roller and Jared Allen. Detroit's running some good stuff out of the 5-out now. The angle that Chicago, watched a couple of their preseason games, on their wide action, screening the opposite wing, coming down in transition, just changing up angles. So it's always evolving, and, you just want to try and stay as up to date as possible. But, as far as who we really initially studied, we took some of the 5-out concepts that we had initially when we started at Iowa State, and then really added to our package based on what Budenholzer was running. I think he was really the first guy in the NBA that really spread it out and went to that 5-out.
Yeah, I always think that's a coach. Like when they're talking about like him getting fired, I think coaches who coach appreciate him and what he's done and really how he's evolved the game more than, I guess, fans, right?
100%. And, it was interesting to see really in the finals, they went away from a lot of their 5-out stuff. They went to a lot more single side drag, single side double drag, and they really took advantage of that. And again, really tried to force the mismatch, get the right matchup, and then they would space it out and attack the switch. So, they would still have their system, their 5-out, but they really went to a lot more ball screen stuff in the playoffs a year ago.
What are some of the things that you brought back from the NBA this time that you think are the most relevant, and maybe that coaches should, again, I still hear coaches say they don't like watching the NBA compared to college, but let's sell them a little bit on some of the things that they should be watching for that you think are most relevant back to college.
Oh, I think the biggest thing is the spacing. NBA spacing is so superior, I think, to any other league certainly in America. Obviously, the European teams have always had great spacing and great movement. But the league has gone, and I think gets a little bit of a bad rap. Back when I was playing in the NBA, it was really isolation basketball because of the illegal defense rule, where you couldn't go below the free throw line and you couldn't cross the midpoint. It was basically 2-on-2 basketball, and you'd lift. A lot of times it was your 3 and 5 man, just get them out of the way. And it just created a lot of stagnant isolation basketball. Now, it was fun to watch the great ones, seeing Jordan in isolation basketball. But then, when they really started winning championships is when they went to a system, which was obviously the triangle. Now, when you watch Golden State, when you watch Utah, when you watch Milwaukee, really, most NBA teams now are running movement type actions or have a system that really generates ball movement. And it is fun basketball to watch. Now, you still have your heavy ISO teams and heavy ISO players, but the game has really evolved. And the NBA now is so much more of a movement type system. And I think you get some really good basketball out of that.
Yeah, it's aesthetically very enjoyable to watch. I agree. So it's fun. And I've heard you say this, and I'm imagining this is still the case. If you said, if we really like a certain action, we might try to get to that same action out of two different sets or multiple different sets. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's such a key point for coaches to understand.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let's just talk the get game, for example. When you curl off a screen, force the help, and then you get a naked get game with the ball handler and the big, just getting that at different areas on the floor. And we've got a lot of different things that we'll run to get to the get, whether it's coming down a wide pin into it. You can run, a stagger into it. You can run a UCLA on the side of the floor into the get, that will help get some, back cut opportunities. So just different ways to get actions on the floor where hopefully you force that help or force two onto the ball. And then again, take advantage of that when that arises.
You mentioned, in your flow game, either a drag or a double drag, for example, in this flow game and this conceptual part of it. And coaches are always fascinated by triggers, I think, nowadays, because everyone believes conceptual is obviously a good way to play. So can you just give us an idea of, say, some of the triggers that might trigger the difference between a drag and a double drag, for example?
Yeah. Good question, Chris. I think a big thing, if the big is ahead of the ball, and what we tell our big is if he doesn't have a clear advantage to the basket, if he does, we'll obviously run to the rim and try to get something early in the possession. But, if he's ahead of the ball, we will go right into a step up. And our step up generally happens on the lane line or probably a step out on the pro lane line. And again, you keep that opposite wing outside that no-fly zone, get him wide out of the way. And as the big rolls, then you shake behind the play. So if the big's ahead of the ball, that will trigger the step up action. We do not balance the floor. So if we have a single side action, you keep the side loaded on the weak side. And then if you hit the top, we'll run, whether it's a back cut or a pin in, just based on how the defense is playing. We really have incorporated the low drag this year, try to get it down by the logo spot and really create a wide seam. So if we have a single side where the big is behind the play, then he'll come set that low drag in the logo area. And it's been good for us. We've seen a lot of good things happen with our team when we get into that situation. If the big is even with the ball, in let's say the four-man is trailing the play a little bit, we'll just go into the single drag. One of the things we really stress to our big as we come down in our flow package is to seek out the bottom hip of the defender. The job of the big is to get the guard to go over. And then as soon as you see those feet open up and going over, then the big is running to the rim. And now you're hopefully getting the other big and creating help on the ball where you can get the big roll into the basket or hit the shake or get the opposite corner. If that man stays in, the opposite low man, if he helps on the roll. So just based on that. And then if the bigs are together, then that's when we could potentially flow into the double drag. And then we can pin on it. Let's say the first one's a shooter and the double drag can take a step down. A lot of people call it Oklahoma action, and then 5 pins on the 4. Or if the 4 sets the second, then you can flare him. So those are just some of the triggers that we will have coming down based on our flow.
That's awesome. What detail. And I want to come back to a little bit of single side tags, but before that, another trigger is a hit ahead, is a pass ahead. And then what type of things are flowing conceptually when you do pass ahead?
Yeah, hit ahead, obviously, the first thing we're looking for is attacking the basket. And, as you have that attack, you got to get that opposite corner fill, just, spacing 101 concepts, get that big to the front of the rim. And then the point guard through ahead, we've got to pull behind to make sure we have that outlet in case he gets stuck. If you have, traditional defense helping out, trapping the box, you have to have that outlet pulling behind the ball. The other thing that we really look for on the throw ahead, if we don't have the attack, we can throw back to the point guard, then that will trigger the, us getting into our 5-out stuff, whether it's a swing into a stagger or a swing to the point guard coming up to the top. And then we've got 4 or 5 different things we'll run out of that.
And the other thing coming back to a little bit is this concept of matchup hunting. And you mentioned it's obviously a big part of the NBA. Is this something we're going to see happen more and more in the college game? Do you think that's going to trickle down a little bit more?
I think so. I think a lot of it is, you see a lot of the same thing. Coaches kind of are who they are a lot of times, Chris. And, if they've run a system and had success with it, then, you're going to see them stick with what they've done. And some coaches run the same thing regardless of who they have out on the floor, and they recruit to those systems. And, for us, we're always going to try to put our guys in a position to be successful based on skill set. So, we'll have different actions. I ran a couple different things in Chicago, when we had more ISO type players, and we try to create those mismatches. And then when we got younger, we really ran a motion type offense. And I thought, had great movement. We had a year where we had Lowry Markkinen and Bobby Portis and Nikola Mirotic and Chris Dunn and, Denzel Valentine. But, we had a 6-week stretch where we had the second best record in the Eastern Conference because our movement was so good. And then late in the game, we'd get the right matchup. And, Chris Dunn really kind of turned into our finisher at that time. That was a fun team to coach, just, the youth that we had and how bought in they were and really the movement type thing that we had. Dunn had a concussion against Golden State, went up to dunk it, fell, lost balance, and had a concussion, was out. And, those things unfortunately happen. But, for a stretch with the movement that we had with that group, it was certainly a fun team to coach.
It was enjoyable to watch, and all your teams have always been enjoyable to watch. I think that's been a testament to, I think, us as coaches loving watching your teams, which is great. Wondering now, we talked about single side tag, also coaches who have coached in college in the NBA, love getting your perspective on ball screen defense first, because that seems to be, again, very different from the NBA to college, how teams traditionally cover ball screens.
Well, the old traditional NBA was really keeping the ball on the side and icing the ball screen. It's really gone more to pushing the ball as bigs have become more skilled. You see more pushing the ball into the screen. There's not a lot of teams that ice the pick and roll. In fact, you used to never see it in college. Now you probably see it in college more than you do in the
Agreed.
NBA.
Yeah, agreed.
When I was at Iowa State, we were, I think, the only team in the Big 12 that iced pick and roll. We've changed. We've now pushing the ball to the screen. And again, a lot of that is based on the ability of front line players to shoot the basketball now. So, for us, and I think this is more of an NBA concept, you're trying to create that tag off the single side to create the shake opportunity, the shake pass. And most teams are going to put their best shooters, in that strong corner as the big rolls to shake out of that corner. Where we help is off the opposite low man, and this is a Budenholzer term that we call that opposite low man the MIG, and we call it the most important guy in our system. So that opposite low man, he is in the restricted area, which you can do more in college because of the defensive 3-second rule in the NBA, and then that guy on top is now what we call the rover. So our rover will take first pass, which could create, if it goes to the corner, an X out opportunity. So that's how we do it. We try to get up to the level of the screen. We also have a defense where we'll drop and pretty much play the pick and roll in a 2-on-2, what they call in the NBA the center field defense, and then stay home with the shooters. So, just a couple. I think you always have to have a couple different coverages, and then the third one obviously is the switch, and we'll switch 1 through 5 with certain lineups out there on the floor, and we'll try to kick out the guard. And that's become a very popular NBA concept. Really, Houston Rockets with when D'Antoni was there, and they really switched everything 1 through 5 and did a phenomenal job with it. And those teams are hard to play against because it created a lot. It takes away the movement when you have those switching defenses. If you don't have a great ISO player, that can make for some long nights.
I'm sure you were a part of these conversations, but I remember so many coaches during that time just trying to prepare themselves for attacking switches nonstop, right? And we thought that was going to take over the game, and it really hasn't taken over the game as much as we probably anticipated, was it?
No, you're absolutely right. And Jeff Bezdelik was the guy that was really behind those defenses. He was phenomenal, and we did a study with him one summer, and he was great, and we took that into to the next season. But it was, I think one team that really changed that, Golden State, they just kept moving. And, when Houston would switch against them, they'd flare and slip and get a lot of action. So I think that changed it some, Chris. If you have a great ISO player, sure, you get the guy. But, Capella moved his feet as well as a guard did. And, those guards, Harden was a better post defender, at that time than he was a perimeter defender. Chris Paul went in there and he battled and fronted, and again, it just created a lot of stagnant offense. But Golden State, they just kept moving and kind of changed, I think, the philosophy on how you attack a switching defense.
I think a lot of people are grateful they kept moving, so we didn't have to watch that all the time. And we do see a lot more variability because of that. So that's fun. You talked about the MIG, the opposite low helping regardless. And I'm imagining this, is it regardless of which direction the ball screen, whether it's coming towards or away from?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And, if it's a step up angle, you still have to get that MIG in there that's responsible to help the roll man. And then we'll cat and mouse it. If they hit the guy at the free throw line and, their big guy wants to shoot, a semi-contested 16, 17 footer, we're fine with that. Once they put it on the floor, then you step outside the restricted area and try to create that next option. And, whether it's drawing a charge, make them kick out, and then hopefully you have crisp rotations, to continue on with the possession. But yes, we will help with that MIG wherever that ball screen is going.
And what are some of the cues for that tag defender about when to stay, when to leave, or as you said, when to cat and mouse?
Yeah, we just want him active. That's the number one thing. You can't be passive as the MIG. And, if a guy starts his dribble, if you go attack it, then you have to rely on your rover to do his job. And then again, once that kick out is made, then you have to get in a scramble situation and make sure you rotate.
And in the center field, you talked about this 2-on-2 coverage of ball screens, this drop coverage. That hasn't really come into college as much as we would have thought, also based on how much it's used in the NBA. More ball screen defensive coverage at the point of the screen. So can you talk about that? Like, what is the advantage of doing that at the college level?
Yeah, I think honestly, when NBA teams were putting it in, I think San Antonio was one of the first when they were playing against Harden, and you really tried to force him to take those shots from inside the 3-point line to the restricted area. And you looked at his percentages at that time, and he was such an elite finisher and obviously an elite 3-point shooter. So if you could get him to take those in-between shots and stay home with their shooting, that at least gave you a chance. But, so with the center field, you really don't have a MIG. So, you keep your guys closer to home. You can still be in help position. If a team has poor spacing, we always talk to our guys about using their poor spacing against them. If you can tag, hit, and still recover, be in those positions. But the center field, really, you're dropped all the way underneath the free throw line. Let's say a middle pick and roll is occurring, and you push to the weak hand and you pursue it. Then if it gets to a certain area on the floor, you have what you call a veer back opportunity, where the big takes the guard, and then the guard has to get into the legs of the big. And a big reason for that is to keep him off the glass on the shot.
So if we're thinking about using, either this center field action or, using the MIG as the low tag, what are some things that we should consider as a coach between choosing one or the other based on opponent scout or based on personnel?
I think there's a little bit of both to that, Chris. I think it's good to have both of them in your package. Some of it is if you have a big that's very mobile and can get out and impact the ball and maybe create turnovers. They've got good activity, good feet, good hands, and then you can rely on your backline guys to help out until that big can get back into the play. If you have a lumbering, slower big, the center field is probably a better defense.
So with the flow or with some of the sets or actions that you run, because we just kind of brought it up in terms of scout, how much tweaking do you do from game to game, or offensive, not necessarily install, but emphasis for certain opponents based on, again, what you identify as their weakness and your strength?
Yeah, obviously every game we're putting in an offensive game plan based on how the defense is playing. If they're a pressure team, if they're going to get out and deny, if they're more pack line, if they're going to switch, if they show, if they're going to trap ball screens, if they trap the post, just all those things come into play when you're putting an offensive game plan together. How well do they get back in defensive transition? All those things, certainly come into play. We're always going to have our staples. We're always going to try to get out and get the ball up the floor quickly. But if they're a pressure team, then, we've got a series of pressure releases that we will have in play to hopefully expose them on that back cut plays, all those to try to relieve the pressure.
So coming from the NBA too, where you have all these resources and probably too much information, I'm imagining another part of this is that when you go back to college, you really know what's important to you in terms of scout and the different analytics. So can you maybe share some insights on what you feel is most important after having all that information thrown at you?
Yeah, it is. Number one, we try to limit paint touches as much as possible. When that thing gets in the paint, a certain number of times, you have a pretty good chance of getting beat if that thing gets into the paint. So obviously, getting back, trying to limit easy baskets as much as possible. That has to be the number one thing in your defense. And I think all of us that are in this position, the first couple games, you learn a lot about yourselves in your transition defense, how much work it generally needs early in the season. And then, making sure your players understand the importance in that area. That, the other thing is finishing possessions. You can work as many rebound drills as you want. We do several every day, but then you go out in a game and all of a sudden they forget how to block out. So, those areas early in the year where you get exposed on it, and then it's about going back and tweaking and watching film and working on it and hopefully improving in two of those very critical areas, as far as our defense is concerned.
So I also like asking coaches like yourself, like you've played for so many different types of coaches, let's say just as a player. And we talk about Johnny Orr, Tim Floyd, Larry Brown, Larry Bird. You said Kevin McHale already. So how is playing for different styles of coaches help prepare you to be a coach? And maybe what are some of the main takeaways that you've had from those experiences?
Yeah, it really has prepared me, to play for Hall of Fame coaches. Flip Saunders was another one that I played for, one of the most gifted offensive coaches that I ever played for. Just played in the triangle. I played for Bill Cartwright in Chicago for a couple of years as well. Larry Bird and Larry Brown had very different philosophies, but both very successful. Kevin McHale, I think, was the best coach as far as spacing concepts that I ever had. So Johnny Orr was a phenomenal coach, and I took a lot of his up-tempo offense, getting that ball up the floor, playing an exciting brand of basketball. I think one thing we probably learned the most from, to be honest with you, Chris, is our high school coach. And I played for a guy, Wayne Clinton. We won a state championship senior year. And you're such a sponge at that age, and you learn so much about the game fundamentally. And, from, I think all of us going back, a lot of it is how you're taught at an early age. I mean, I didn't take a 3-pointer until my junior year because I was stuck on the block. I was an up and under guy with a hook shot. And then, just continued to work on my skill set. My dad was a professor, never touched a basketball in his life. My grandfather was a coach actually at Nebraska for 9 seasons, but unfortunately he passed away when I was 3 years old. So I never really got a chance to talk the game with him. So really I was taught by my coaches. And again, going back to those early years with my high school coach, because you didn't have the AAU stuff back when I was playing. It was more about playing multiple sports, and I played 4 sports. And, when it was basketball season, I relied on getting better from my high school coach. So that's an important part of it, are those early years. And do you have a guy that's going to teach you the game right? And I was very fortunate to have a great one.
So speaking to the importance, which you've already acknowledged, the importance of the high school coach in those early development years, and now with your experience with newcomers into the NBA and then obviously back to college, what are we missing in your opinion in terms of some of those development levels that would help prepare players better for college, say, and then professional?
Yeah, it's another great question, Chris. The thing, there's a lot of great AAU programs out there. There's no doubt about it. The one thing that I wish would change a little bit is they would have more of a skill training, also development of, physical development part of their programs. You lose out so much. There's so many games. I mean, you play 4 games, you play 5 games in a day, and you don't have the intensity. I think you lose the value of winning and losing a lot of times in that. And then, as important as anything as a young player, the development of your body. And when you're playing that many games, it just takes away from your training, your individual training on your skill, the fundamentals, and then the training to get stronger. And, I think, like I said, back when I was a kid, you didn't know any better. I mean, you played all the sports, and, I think it was good. I think it was good for me. Football helped me in a big way. Running track, helped me become more agile, more, faster, stronger. So, all those things I think made us more well-rounded back then. Certainly you're getting a lot more work on your game, but at the same time, you're working so much, and, you worry about the burnout factor. As we talked earlier, when you start training in June and you don't start your season until November, that's a lot of time. I worry about burning our guys out in that amount of time. So, I think fundamentally probably is the biggest thing that I think could be fixed. by playing less games. And I don't know if that'll ever happen. Or, there's so much money involved now with the AAU stuff and the circuits and that type of thing. But I think that would help the game if it went more fundamental and then physical development.
I agree for sure. You mentioned relationships already, and I want to say this. When I was at the Bulls practice, you came over as a head coach and introduced yourself. And I want to say, I don't say this in judgment of others that don't do it, but I want to say how rare that is in my experiences. So thank you for that. But also talk to me about that, because that seems to be part of your philosophy about building relationships.
Well, it's important, Chris. And, I think the world of you. I think you know that. I love the stuff that you post. And, you're one of the few guys I really look at kind of religiously on social media. I just think you have so many great ideas and concepts, and you post great content of actions and, not just, from our continent, but then you go overseas and you post the stuff from some of the greatest minds in the world. And, just the movement that those European teams have, it's phenomenal. So
fun to watch, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, I've always been a big fan of yours, and yeah, you do try, you just never know what type of impact you could have on somebody by going and introduce yourself or giving them a card or keeping in touch, to try to talk. I've always tried to share as much as possible. I think that is one of the responsibilities, is to help other coaches in this profession grow. And I've been very fortunate in this game, obviously to play it at the highest level for 10 years, to work in a front office, to be a general manager for a couple of years, and then, to get involved in coaching at all levels. My alma mater at Iowa State, get a chance to coach at the highest level, and now back in the college game again. I've been so fortunate. So if I can help people along the way, certainly I'm there for them. And you're right, there's a lot of coaches that they don't want to share anything. That's fine. But I think it's just based on your personal philosophies.
It's great stuff, and I appreciate you saying that. And maybe just to wrap up, I asked you the coaching side of it, so let's ask the playing side of it. Because you fill different roles as a player as well, which obviously has probably significantly impacted your ability to be able to be empathetic to your players and to be able to help them understand the process that they're going through. So can you talk about that, how those different roles you played as a player helped you connect with players better, probably?
Yeah, it's helped me a lot. And, as I always say to my players, I think the biggest thing you have to have honesty and transparency with your players. If you don't, you're going to have a lot of issues on your hands. And we've had individual meetings with all of our players talking about roles as we head into the season. And, you have to be clear and concise on those to try not to create confusion. I always say, I played every role you can possibly play over the course of my career. Early on in my tenure with Indiana, I didn't even dress for games. I sat behind the bench. Then I went from dressing and being the last guy, and then I became in the rotation, and then I became a starter, and then I became a captain. And, I became a key contributor on a team that I think had a great chance to win a championship in Minnesota. I had Sam Cassell not torn a muscle in his hip. So, I played everything you can possibly play. And the thing I always appreciated is when my coach talked to me about what my role was. I may not have liked it, but I accepted it. And that's all you can do. And then be ready when your name is called, because ultimately over the course of a season, we're not running sprint. This is a marathon. You're going to get your name called. And, it's how you approach things will determine how you take advantage of those opportunities. And that's what's going to define, your success as a player. So it is, you have to have the relationship to be able to have those conversations, and hopefully everybody accepts them, listen, if a guy was happy when I came out and said, hey, listen, you're not in a rotation right now, you'd worry about them because they're competitors. Of course, you expect them to be upset. But at the same time, if ultimately everyone's on the same page and has the same goal, those roles have to be accepted. And then, as I said, when your name's called, go in and take advantage, and hopefully that'll lead to more opportunity.
I'm imagining it's not just honesty, it's also providing them a blueprint to change their role. And that's got to be a big part of what you're doing for them as well, isn't it?
Well, no doubt. And, your role, we had guys last year that started out of the rotation that ended up starting for us at the end of the year. And in turn, you had guys that starting that ended up out of the rotation. So, roles are always evolving. They're always changing. And every time you step on that floor, it's opportunity.
And again, players don't necessarily see that in the moment, but providing demonstrative examples of that helps them understand that it's possible, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, again, you talk to some of the guys even this year that may not be in our early rotation that were in our rotation a year ago, and their roles change. So just continue to use those as examples, because you have to try and keep their spirits up as well, because ultimately they are going to have an opportunity to hopefully come out there and impact your team in a positive way.
I had mentioned last question, but I got to ask this one. I think I'll give you a quick hit on this one. So what was one thing you brought from college to the NBA that you thought was successful? And then maybe the inverse of that, what was one thing that you brought from the NBA back to college? If you're just to say one thing.
Well, that's a great question. I think one thing, when I was coaching in college, I always kind of considered myself an NBA guy. I'd spent 19 years of my life in the NBA, and I'd never coached. My only college experience was as a player, playing 4 years at Iowa State under two great coaches, Johnny Orr and Tim Floyd. And when I went to the NBA, I really had always run an NBA type system. So, I really kind of considered myself, to be more of an NBA guy. And, in turn, when I came back, after getting the opportunity to coach in Chicago, you're competing obviously against the greatest minds in the world on a nightly basis. And you just try to take as much from those guys you had an opportunity to compete against and apply it to your system. And, for me, when I got let go, I didn't sit around and hang my head and feel sorry for myself. I went out and used it as an opportunity to learn. I went out and spent a couple days with Steve Kerr in Golden State, went out and watched other practices. You always are learning, and you can always get better. I think once you think you got it figured out, it's probably time to get out of this business.
Well, we're always learning from you, and we're so grateful. Thank you for all you share, and for all the cool little counters and plays that you add from a game-to-game basis. Keep me on Synergy all the time watching you guys. So thank you for all that as well.
Well, I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for having me on.